Hi, this is Guy Wallace. I started in learning and development way back in 1979, and I semi-retired in 2023. But my current mission as a semi-retired L&D professional is to help enterprise learning and development organizations become more performance-based. Welcome to my podcast. Good day, Greg. First of all, let me thank you for agreeing to do this podcast with me today. For our audience, could you do a bit of a preamble, introduction of yourself? Tell us who you are. Tell us what you do in the L&D space. And then if you could just simply tell us what tool or technique you're going to share with us today. And then, tell us a little bit about what context is appropriate for someone to use this. So why would they and where would they maybe want to use this in their own work? And then we'll dive in, and we've got some more questions after that.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me, Guy. I'm really excited to be here visiting with you.
Thank you.
I am a learning designer, instructional designer, learning experience designer. We're not going to have that conversation today, I hope. My career is a mixed bag of attempts to create experiences that help people grow and change in ways that help them achieve their goals. So I've primarily worked in technology. Most recently, currently, I work at a large consulting company, but I've also spent time designing experiences in a bunch of other industries. And so in the past, I've been a filmmaker, a failed second grade school teacher, small business owner, a door-to-door salesman, a bunch of other things, all of which have informed my approach that I use today. So in addition to learning design, I love to read. I'm an amateur athlete and plant-based chef, heavy on the amateur part, but those are fun things. A Christian, married to my wife, Cassie, for 14 years, almost. In August, it'll be 14 years, and we've got 4 children. So that's a little bit about me. And today I wanted to talk about the performance analysis diagram by the great Robert F. Mager. And this comes from a collection of books that he has that all fall under his criterion referenced instruction approach. So with that, this is an oldie but a goodie. It informs a lot of current approaches that your listeners may be familiar with. If anyone knows about Kathy Moore's action mapping, or you've read books by Julie Dirksen, or there's so many other things, you'd probably know better than me, Guy. My guess is Robert Mager wasn't the first ever to think about these types of things, but the way that he put it on paper, I found incredibly refreshing when I first saw it a few years ago.
Yeah, he was quite a character, and I would agree that he was not the first. In fact, in the early editions of the book that you're going to talk about, where this tool comes from, in the very first edition of that book, what Gary Rumler told me was that he and Tom Gilbert were credited in that first edition of that book because they had a diagnostic tool that was similar to what Mager and Peter Pipe produced in their book, Analyzing Performance Problems, or You Really Ought to Want to. And then an interesting thing about this, because there's multiple versions of all of this, but Rumler told me that he really liked Bob's, but it was what is his name now? I'm blanking on it. But there was somebody else who did a much better job of marketing, and it was Zap the Gaps. And so I can't think of the authors. Dana Gaines Robinson and Jim Robinson. And so they were masters at this. But so there were a lot of these different models going around. And one of the things that Mager talked about a little bit was that he was sorry that in the 1960s they spent so much time focused on behaviors when they should have focused on performance. And so this book and this tool was eye-opening. But anyway, so we've talked a little bit about this. And so why don't we dive into that? Because I also wanted to talk with you about your podcast experience. And so we'll do that towards the end of this podcast. Yeah. But so tell us about this tool and how you've used it, or and what context, where would people in the L&D profession find utility in this?
Yeah. Yeah. So folks who've been in the field for a while are not new to the idea of the fact that just because somebody requests some training doesn't mean training's actually needed, right? And this was not a revelation, I'd say, for me, but the way that this flow or this diagram expanded my vocabulary and my mindset was so helpful in working with stakeholders. And so when I first learned about it, I actually got the language, and I don't know if this originated with Mager or somewhere else, but the most simplistic view of all of this is thinking about, all right, there's a discrepancy, there's a gap between what is and what should be. And most often that discrepancy is going to fall under at least one of three buckets: a hill, a will, or a skill problem, right? So a hill, there's a lot of things that when we go up a hill, there's friction, there's problems. And that could be a process problem. That could be not a motivation. That could be a technology issue. That could be an incentive problem, like all these different things. A will, right, that gets into pure motivation. And if you're incentivizing somebody to do a behavior or a performance that you actually don't want them to do, then you could train them till you're blue in the face, right? But as long as they're getting what they want, it's not going to change, right? And then, of course, there's a skill, and a lot less things than initially maybe expected fall into that bucket. And so with that, this diagram it's in his book called Analyzing Performance Problems, or You Really Oughta Wanna. And so Mager provides wonderful examples that all make you smile around how this applies. But what he's got in the back is this handy dandy quick reference checklist. And so I'm going to use that to kind of guide your listeners through the types of things that you could think about. But of course, I can send over some links if you want to include in the show notes. You can go see this diagram and work your way through it.
Yes, that would be
great. There's got basically five key sections. So we'll start in section 1. It's just describing the problem. How many of us have gone in trying to create a solution without realizing what we're actually trying to solve? And I will say, whether it's a problem or just clarifying a vision of the direction you want to go, right? We all know the regular reference to Alice in Wonderland and the Cheshire Cat. If we don't know where we're going, it's hard to design a direction there. So it talks about asking yourself, what's the performance discrepancy, right? Whose performance is at issue? Why is there said to be a problem? What's the actual performance of the issue? And then a bigger question is this worth pursuing? Which I really like.
Yeah.
Is this worth actually solving? Or is it just this particular stakeholder is a very loud squeaky wheel? Is there an actual need there? So that's the first part. I'll pause there. I don't know if this is the right level of detail. I can go through each of these, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that this is good, because people who are not familiar with any of these diagnostic tools maybe don't understand that the focus and the start is beginning with the end in mind. So and that's what you're covering here. Is there a discrepancy? Is there an issue? The only comment I would make is that I've heard thought leaders way back in the late 80s, early 90s complain that too often we position ourselves as problem solvers, as repair people, when we could be doing greenfield things. We could help design things from scratch. And so we can look at problems or opportunities, the same, two sides of the same coin, if you will.
I love that. And I think that's exactly right. If we get too stuck in the mindset of repair people, or many of us get in this field because we want to help people.
Yeah.
So how do we help solve this problem? That's not bad, but there's more we can do.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more. Great. Well, the second section is really brief. He calls it Explore Fast Fixes. And so sometimes I've fallen in this trap. We identify a problem, we start getting all blue sky and drawing all these big things, and we make all these plans, when in reality, perhaps, and here's some questions he asks us, perhaps answering some of these could solve it. He says, do those concerned know what's expected of them? Right? Sometimes there's just not clarity of expectation. Can those concerned describe desired performance? Do they know what their expected accomplishments are? right? Are there obvious obstacles to performance, right? I've been in there, trying to create Salesforce training. All right, how do we help people do this super complex process where they have to press all these different buttons? Well, it turns out it's that situation where we call it human error, but we've created such a complicated mess of a technological process that, of course, people are going to make mistakes. And so, is there a way we can simplify the process?
Yep.
I have people drilling holes in my wall. Can you hear that?
No, not really.
Okay, well, hopefully it's not too bad. Okay, the third section then is check consequences. And this one I really love a lot because we're not dealing with AI bots. We're not dealing with animals or machines, though one could argue that humans are a hybrid of animal, but we are a special species. And so, is the desired performance actually punishing?
No.
If I do a really good job on something, is my reward to get more work that is actually difficult? Right? Is it punishing or perceived as punishing? Right? Or is undesired performance rewarding? Right? So maybe I slack off and I do this other thing and no one says anything and I actually get to enjoy the benefits of my bad behavior or my bad performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are there any consequences at all, right? Well, we really want leaders to do this with their teams, but it turns out the teams don't like it when leaders do that, and so it sort of punishes the leader. So they end up stop doing it, and so we say, well, they need better training. Well, that cycle never works out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, retraining people. Rumler used to say that whenever he heard the word as in retraining, he would get a queasy feeling because there would be something, ridiculous coming up and that was a good indicator, in fact, if you needed retraining, that there may be something else at play and it's not a knowledge and skill deficit. It could be the expectations aren't clear, as you said, or the consequence system is actually rewarding what you don't want and punishing what you do want.
Right. Exactly. So I love that idea of just checking natural consequences, right? And some things like true learning are hard and uncomfortable. And that's one of the interesting, nuances that we face as designers is sometimes the unpleasant thing, like a hard workout or a big plate of broccoli, isn't immediately rewarding, right? So we have to find ways to help it be clear to people that, hey, eventually the consequence for doing this is going to be what you want. It's aligned with your values. So then the next section, we're on number 4 of 5, is to enhance competence. So this is when we actually get to the skill question, right? Is it a skill deficiency? And this is one of my very favorite questions Mager proposes, and I have a twist on this that I ask. Could they do it? Could they do this skill if their lives depended upon it, right? If they really had to. If the answer is yes, then it's not a skill issue, right?
Yeah.
Another way of thinking about this is if I said, Guy, I'll give you $1 million if you can do this, and you can't. Well, then, yeah, it's because you have a skill deficiency. You need training, right? Mm-hmm. Like I could not go do a Navy SEAL course right now. I just literally can't. No matter how much money you give me, my life's on the line. I just can't do it. I haven't trained. So that's one of my favorite questions to ask is, hey, stakeholder, this is a really interesting point. I'm just wondering if this is skills, because I think if we gave them a massive gift card somewhere, I think they'd figure out how to do it. Right?
Right. Yeah, Mager used to, you can't phrase it this way anymore because it's not politically correct, but he used to say, if you held a gun to their head, could they now do it? And if they could, then you don't have a knowledge and skill issue, you have a motivation issue. Something is motivating them to do something other than what you want them to do. And many of the gurus Rumler and Gilbert and others would talk about, expectations and consequences are the most important things, and that's why Bob has it in his book, because they all worked together, knew each other's work, and would argue with themselves about whose approach and wording, language, imagery, etc. was best.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, and it can really clear a lot of mist around the ambiguity of a training request when you can clarify that, right?
Yeah.
Because then you start to think these other questions are then really great follow-ups. Well, could they do it in the past, right?
Yeah.
So often, especially when I was in technology, we'd have new software updates, and it's like, oh no, we need to train all the customer service agents on how to do this. And it's like, well, what are they doing? Well, they're clicking these buttons that then lead them to know what to do. It's like, okay, well, they've been doing that for 3 years. Do you think they'd be able to figure this out in the new one? Right? Have they used it in the past? Is the skill used often? Right? And this gets us into a whole different type of analysis of how difficult is the task? Can it be simplified? Right? Are there other obstacles that are still in the way? Do they have what it takes? Right? Some people, you could say, will never be able to do a Navy SEAL training, no matter how much they want to, and no matter how much training they get. So is there an honest question we need to have about, is this the right task for the right group of people?
Right.
The last thing then is develop solutions. So, all right, we've gone through a bunch of different things, the incentives, the nature of the competence at hand, the audience, right? Well, what solution's best? Have all the potential solutions been identified? Are we going to address one or more parts of the problem? What intangible costs for the problem are we going to address? And what is the cost of the solution, right? If we sit down and say, well, we're going to solve this over the next 3 months, even though we know it'll be 5 months, is that really the commitment we want to make right now, right? And is it going to yield the value worth the effort? So these sort of follow-up questions are also really great to consider. So that's the overall flow that he provides. There's some good nuance in there that you'll see in the visual. But I love this because it just invites you to think through some concrete questions about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who it's for. And it doesn't have to be antagonistic as you're responding to a stakeholder asking these. If you can frame it in a way that builds into a trusting relationship that hopefully you've developed with your stakeholder, this is one of the ultimate value adds we can provide as learning designers.
I think we can help in the conversation with people, but I think that I worry because I hear people saying, don't be an order taker, challenge that request. And until you have data, until somebody has data that's accurate, complete, and appropriate enough about the situation, about the performance, about the quality, quantity, costs, about the better, faster, cheaper kinds of issues, until you have that data and you can say what's the deficiency and what's the cause of that deficiency, it's inappropriate for us to be pushing back. Now, clarifying a request for training is helpful. But if the person coming to you is some sort of a middleman and they don't really know, they've been asked to ask us or to place the order, however they look at it, they only have a certain amount of data. So this is the beginning of analysis, in my view, when we start asking these kinds of questions about a request to solve a problem, to address an opportunity, what current state, future state, whatever. It's important for us to begin to help the client begin to think that there's these other possibilities too. And it's not like we're trying to reject some work that they're trying to give us. We're not trying to do that. We just want to understand what we're getting into as we roll up our sleeves and start to help. So these are all the kinds of questions that you ask at the very beginning and then almost continuously through the initiative, because you can keep on stumbling upon new variables that happened just recently or are variables that hadn't been uncovered until you get to a certain point. But so the whole Mager thing and the Rumler and the Robinsons and all these other people that use these diagnostic tools, and they're in a way they're similar to a lot of the quality movement's tools. What Six Sigma was all about, when Motorola created Six Sigma, they licensed Gary Rumler's intellectual property. So there's that whole front end there of that what is and what is to be. So
Yep.
the current state versus the future state, and looking at all of that and understanding the value of the issue that we're addressing is really critical to getting stakeholders to pay attention, because stakeholders are busy, and if you've got a nickel and dime problem, they don't have time for nickel and dime problems. In fact, it's probably just worthwhile just to live with those nickel and dime problems because there's bigger fish to fry.
Hmm.
But thanks for sharing with us your thoughts about this tool. And you're going to share with me a URL so I can point people to other resources that you have available on this.
Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, the book itself you could get on Amazon and other places for, I don't
Yeah.
know, $10 or something,
Yeah.
and it'll be the best $10 you've got. It's so much fun to read. And I'm not joking about that. And you don't even have to be a full-blown nerd to love this book. And it's so applicable even now, like even with AI and all the technology and all the things, like this is the heart and soul in my mind of what good design starts with, like what you
Yeah.
said, Guy. And it also, if you can do this and you can do it effectively, it sets you up to do a really amazing evaluation, both developmentally throughout the process. But then
Hmm.
when you're done, you can determine, did we do what we set out to do, right? Does this solve what we wanted it to do for this audience? And
Yeah.
that's super powerful and important too.
And I think that that's another way to get clients to think differently, because if they come to you and you're in L&D and they think it's the same old L&D stuff and I need them, necessary evil. But if you start talking about business things in the language of business and processes and performance rather than on learning interventions of some type, if you're really focused on their performance that they own, that they have stakes in, that they want to get addressed and fixed and resolved, um, and address the needs as they see them, this allows you to begin that dialogue so you understand their perspective of the situation that's hopefully your target, so you can see who's in that target zone and what's really going on and where's the gap and how do we address that. And maybe instruction, training, learning isn't necessarily a part of that unless some other non-instructional intervention is of such that it's a bigger change, and therefore the incumbent populations will need to be get some new training on this new aspect of it. But then new people coming in will need the whole thing.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's an opportunity to do some catch-up instruction with people, just to teach them the delta, the new and different thing, and then incorporating all of that into whatever original instruction you have for that target audience. So
Exactly.
I really like
Yeah.
the tool because I've been using it since basically day one, and it's just exciting to see that some of these things, we could talk about. Well, I know what's old is new again, but
Yep.
reviving some of these tools because they are kind of tried and true, and the language is sometimes clunky and old school, and so yeah, refresh it to do that. That would be great. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us. If we could shift gears a little bit, I wanted to do a couple more things here. I want to ask you about some people who are also involved in performance improvement aspects of learning and
Hmm.
development, and get some names here, do a shout out, a call out of them. I'd like to talk about some of the biggest problems and opportunities in L&D from your perspective, and some suggestions that you might have for addressing that. But before we get into that, I was a guest on your podcast back in 2021, and you did 75 plus, because I found a couple that weren't numbered in your list of podcasts,
Hmm.
over the 27 months that you did them. So doing a podcast, I think, is a very interesting endeavor. You get to meet a lot of people. You get to learn a little bit about from each one of them.
Hmm.
And so before we talk about specific people and problems and opportunities in L&D, what I was hoping to get is for, what are some of your key takeaways, your lessons learned, things that have somehow made it now into your repertoire, your practices, your philosophies, or whatever. So what stands out from all that experience of doing all those podcasts, what did you learn, and what can you share with our audience today about that?
Yeah, when we talk about one of the questions that we'll get to about, what are some of the biggest problems in our current situation?
Mm-hmm.
As I was writing down some thoughts and just reflecting, I realized every single bullet point I was writing down was in large part influenced by those that I talked to when doing my podcast, right? And
Yeah.
that was a huge influence on the way I currently design things. I'd say as much as my graduate work and all my other formal training, doing the podcast was extremely influential on the practical day-to-day work that I do as a designer. And so I found it, one of the main reasons I started the podcast was to kind of re-energize myself. To be honest, I was feeling a little disenchanted with the field, a little tired of the same old conversations, and just I was building solutions for the same audience, for the same stakeholders, and it was just kind of blah. And so when I started the podcast, it brought up all the old fire that I had back when I was in school and an eager beaver, ready to hit the road. And it expanded my mind into the types of things that were possible and how people were thinking about all aspects of design and leadership, because there's so much there. Mm-hmm. And it was just so exciting to see these individuals who themselves had a lot of passion and energy around these things. And so almost every episode, I would ask people, if there's any recommendations that they had for learning and developing and improving oneself. And it was amazing how common it was to get the answer, go talk to people, right? And especially, part of that podcast time, it was during lockdown with COVID and so forth. And it was a little more difficult to go meet people for lunch and that sort of thing. But what I loved about podcasts as a natural introvert is there's very little shooting of the breeze at the beginning of conversations. You just dive right into the meat, and that's the type of conversations I love. I want to get right in and let's talk about stuff that matters a lot, right? And so by talking to lots of different people, it was a great form of education because it had me thinking differently. I was preparing for those conversations by reading full books or papers.
Yeah.
And that forced me to write stuff down, right? Which we know as learning professionals, when you reflect and then you put pen to paper, your brain is literally doing different things, and when you just reflect quietly, without talking or writing. So all of that came together to be a really great experience for me.
Well, thank you. So I wanted a chance to help people broaden their networks by giving them names of individuals who they might want to follow because these people are sharing. And so whether the names are well-known names or not well-known names, that doesn't really matter. Can you name 3 people or so that you would suggest that others follow and maybe share with us, what you think that they might have to offer?
Yeah, I thought about this and tried to think of a good variety of people that might give listeners an expanded or different perspective than what they might commonly see, but I have no idea what people might commonly see. So my thoughts are these ones. Number one is Dr. Elena Schlachta. She's been really active on LinkedIn and a bunch of other things. She has a free weekly newsletter, and her focus, she has a PhD in measurement and evaluation, and she's a data person, and has such an accessible, open, and energizing approach to the big question of, well, how do we measure success of what we're doing? And she's just methodically knocking down all the myths, all the excuses, all the things that we might say, well, it's just too hard. She's got a treasure trove of resources in her newsletter. Also, she has a free monthly meetup where you can just meet with her and a bunch of other, I was at it yesterday, with other people who are interested in this, and she runs a facilitated session. And she's not paying me for this. I don't get anything for this, but honestly, like she's a great example of excellent content marketing. She's not pushing stuff at you all the time. She did recently write a book. I have not read it yet, but I'm eager to. But she's not always shoving that down your throat. So I think she's got some really great content that will help you think about, in the age of AI as well, like what does success look like? How do we get really clear about performance? And how do we work with stakeholders to measure that? Mm-hmm. So that's the first one. The next one is a little different because he's very involved in the product development, product management space. His name is Samuel Hulick. That's Hulick. He was a guest on my podcast, and his whole expertise is about user onboarding, right? We've all been there when you get a new tool and there's little prompts and you kind of go through that onboarding experience. He has a whole book about it. It's like an ebook. And then he provides these hilarious and informative teardowns on his website. So by a teardown, it means you can go through a little slideshow on his website of like someone signing up for Salesforce or for ClickUp or for Monday.com or whatever. And he goes through slide by slide the whole experience. And then there's little commentary about what's working well and things not so well. It's funny, and it's also really interesting to think about that journey. And while it's not explicitly L&D or even performance support, it is in a lot of ways because it's more related to customer education and that whole discipline.
Yep.
Something I've taken from him that I really appreciate is just the whole idea of value-driven design. It's not new, but the way he's phrased it is great. He's got this comic strip in his book where we are not trying to help people become, the giant Mario with the fireball, right? We are trying to convince them that it's the journey of becoming that's what they want. It's not the fireball that they want. It's they want to be the Mario with the fireball, right? Mm-hmm. And so understanding deeply, what is it that our learners or our users or participants or, these people that we're serving, what do they truly value? And that can then frame how you approach the design instead of how do we get this product to be a habit for them all the time, right? Yeah. So anyway, he posts somewhat more sporadically on LinkedIn, but I think is more active on other platforms. But his website, and again, I'll give you the links to these, is useronboard.com. It's hugely valuable. The last one I'll give is a friend of mine from graduate school. His name is Kyle Clemens. And he's done a lot in user experience design, product management, instructional design, and so forth. Right now, he is a product manager at a learning technology company. And he has some fantastic regular posts about learning as an individual, and kind of he'll track his own data for like on Goodreads, for example, of all the books that he's read, and he'll map the data of like how old the books are and what does that mean. And he has lots of interesting posts about credentialing and other pieces. So I recommend those three to you, and hopefully folks will find some value in following those individuals.
Yes, thank you for sharing them and pointing our audience to them. Let me shift gears here yet again. Yeah, so can you spend a few minutes and talk with us about what you see from your perspective? What are some of the biggest problems or opportunities that enterprise L&D, corporate L&D faces, and do you have any suggestions for how the field, the profession should go about addressing them?
Yeah, so I've got I think about four bullet points here, so we'll see if we get into them. But the first comes from the book by Harold G. Nelson and Eric Stolterman called The Design Way. It's a pretty feels somewhat theoretical and mystical almost book. As I grappled with it and read it in detail, it's so rich and full of good insight. But there's one chapter called The Guarantor of Design. And it's this whole idea that at the end of the day, who is being the guarantor, or who's taking responsibility and commitment that the design is going to run effectively. back in the day, I was doing my graduate work and we were interviewing instructional designers. And I remember one of the most significant things that stuck out was the reluctance for designers to actually put their name on some of the things that they were being required to create. Almost shameful, right? Like, I don't want anyone to know I had to pump out this awful fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
But my stakeholders made me, and I do what I have to. I wish I wasn't a order taker, but at the end of the day, what am I going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us can resonate with that to a certain extent. And so this chapter goes into the idea of no matter what the excuse may be, to have a solid character and be a great designer is to take ownership and responsibility for your designs. And that it can be hard at times. And it gives you the question of which hill am I going to stand on and battle this out, and which ones am I going to allow to fall, right? Because we're also working with humans and stakeholders and others with that have needs and demands and so forth. And I have tried to be that designer like that you were describing. I'm not an order taker. I'm going to say no to everything and fight everything. Well, who wants to work with that guy?
Exactly. Yeah.
Especially when he phrases it that way. So I want to be clear. I'm not advocating that we shut down everyone and say, well, this isn't perfect and my name's on it, right? That's not what I'm saying. But it is a big mindset shift from, thinking along the lines of, I'll share an example or two. Sometimes I'll use some of my own words. I've blamed stakeholders like they want to move forward with new requests and they don't want to do evaluation. They don't want to do postmortems. I wish they cared about it, but they don't, right? Shifting that to, well, I can document learning during a project. I can gather evaluation results to make a compelling argument to do things better next time. I can move forward on projects once I'm clear of what success looks like. And if I don't, I'm going to get clarity in order to move forward. It doesn't mean being antagonistic. So in general, as a field, I feel like taking on that responsibility of we are putting our names on this and we're not going to just cave and do whatever we're told, and we're also not going to shut everybody else down, right? But we're going to move forward with responsibility as guarantors of the design.
Yeah, I think that is a tough one here. We all work in a context where there are consequences for our own behavior, and either pushing back gently or not for a request when maybe it's obvious that this isn't going to solve anything, and we need telling me I can't do analysis when I see that that's probably really critical at having success at the end of the day. Those are tough things that we ask of people to do and to put their names on it, but a lot of times they are trapped by their own processes. So you work your process if there is one. If not, maybe that's even better, because now you can do things differently. You can do things better or more correctly, and still meet whatever demands and constraints that your clients have. But yeah, that is hard. Too often we can just blame the system.
Right.
And Deming would have talked about, the 94% of the problems are not due to individual or team performance. It's due to the system. And so ideas, our learning experience designers and developers are trapped in a system, in a process, and they can only do the best that they can do. But it's difficult to take pride in something that was done poorly and resulted in a poor product with going to have poor results, and who wants to be associated with that. But on the other hand, if you were to take responsibility for that and say, I did it, I was part of that, and it bombed and it failed, but this is what I learned from it, you can use even a failure as an opportunity, as a springboard into sharing with that stakeholder group or a different stakeholder group on the next project,
Yeah.
what you're willing to do. I would tell people that I'm going to salute you and I'm going to do what you've requested. If it was up to me, I wouldn't do it that way. I'd find some way to get that across,
Right.
appropriate to the situation.
Yeah.
But let them know that I'm going to do that for them. So, hey, get out of my way. Let me get on that. But if it was me, I wouldn't do that. I would do this other thing first or second or whatever to get ready to go do it. Because if by the time we figure out what we're doing doesn't work, it's going to be too late. A lot of sunk costs, investments into this, and we've lost all that time. So maybe we need to go slow to go fast. But that is a huge issue here. But if I were to channel my inner Deming, I would say, it's the system and management owns the system. So I would pin this all on L&D leadership, and then if the L&D leadership is not doing a satisfactory job, then I would blame enterprise leadership for letting those people be in place and being ineffective.
Yeah, I think that's right. When we're able to roll with the request, right, or to roll with the direction we don't fully agree, but be really clear of and let's learn from this together. So let's follow up, see how it goes, and then not in a told you so mindset, right? But in a, well, let's learn together. And that goes to my next bullet point, actually, is becoming a trusted advisor, learning advisor. There's a great book by Keith Keating, he's put out a couple of years ago now, that has a lot of really good insights about this. That's another person that folks could follow if they want to. And this is not a new idea, but he's packaged it in a really helpful, valuable way. Right, is to build strong relationships with these folks that are giving you requests, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're able, like you said, let's learn from this mistake. Let's learn together. Let's develop a really amazing relationship that can help us produce stuff we're both proud of. That is just such a different spirit than, oh, you give me such garbage and, your leaders are a problem and there's a problem over here with the system, right? It's just, it's an energy that reduces people and reduces solutions. And so I think being able to develop that trusted relationship is really powerful. And we're in a unique position in L&D in that we touch so many different parts of organizations and we have visibility into so many things that those that we're working with do not. And to be able to bring that as a trusted advisor and put that forward, we're now starting to be a part of the solution for that blue sky rather than simply the butt end of a request, right at the bottom of the chain.
Yeah, and hopefully, again, I think if L&D leadership is dealing with the stakeholders of the enterprise, the executives, and the middle managers, and they're out there championing what we're doing. This is how we do business. This is why we do business this way, and promoting and selling a performance-based orientation to learning and development that is measurable, that we're going not after the topics in the middle, but at the performance at the end, because people need to know things to be able to do things, to be able to produce things of value. And so how we begin to look at performance and leverage that, I think that when we speak the language of business, instead of the language of learning, when we've learned and mastered that, so that we can talk in the language of business, because our clients, our stakeholders don't really want to learn all about learning and development, how wonderful it is and how you're so enthralled and enthusiastic about being in that profession. That's fine, but they have other interests. And so I found that when they want to know more about how you made the sausage, because originally, initially, they don't care about how you make the sausage unless they're afraid you're going to screw up, and then they're going to tell you how to make the sausage because they've had a bad experience. And so how we build trust, depending on, what is the current state situation? Do we have a non-trusting, a no-trusting, a neutral? Where are we starting from? And then you got to be careful not to generalize, because that's not with every stakeholder. So you got to know all of your stakeholders that you're serving, and what are their plans and strategies and opportunities for going forward, dealing with their current state issues and all that stuff. And so I worry a lot of time that individual practitioners while depending on how their L&D team is organized and what their role and function is, they may not have that opportunity to go and sell and promote and all that stuff, nor should we ask them to be pushing that, as Rumler called it, 50 foot of wet rope, because we're not going to push it very far. So that's a difficult situation, and we need leadership to do its leadership things, and then practitioners to come along and be able to fulfill the promises of leadership and the promises of the processes that have been put in place, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that distinction because they are different. And yet sometimes if you're a practitioner, you're coming in, and if leadership is not doing those things, like you're talking before, you can feel hobbled in some ways, like, no matter what I do, it's not going to work out, which is then leads to a dark spiral, right? And one thing that I found tremendously helpful, this is the last piece that I'll share, is just around this concept of value I was talking about before. There's this awesome formula. It comes from the book Designing Your Work Life by Stanford professors Dave Evans and Bill Burnett. They have a similar book about just designing your life. And they have a whole chapter in this Design Your Work Life book about company politics, right? And, we all hate that. We don't want to deal with it. Let's just avoid it. The fact is, it's just politics is a label on a fact of life that all of us have. You can't escape it. I mean, you can try to bury your head to it, but their formula is this: power equals value plus recognition. And this formula, I feel like, is so powerful for building a relationship with your immediate stakeholders, but also your own leadership. If you can figure out what is valuable to these stakeholders, what is valuable to my CEO or my other leaders, right? How can I contribute to that value, right? Is what I'm making valuable at all to what they see as valuable? As I build things that are valuable to them, how can I ensure that it's recognized, that they feel and enjoy the value that I've added? And as I do this, increasingly, I will develop more power. And I'm not saying that because we all want to hold the rings of power or anything evil. Power is simply, as Martin Luther King said, the ability to affect change, right? And get things done in a way that you want, right? That you're driving with your values. So I think that element, even if you're the quote unquote lowest on the totem pole, right? You're coming in as a practitioner, and you can start to understand, well, what does my manager or what does my director value right now? If they haven't shared their quarterly goals or OKRs or whatever, how can I ask for that in a way that doesn't sound condescending or stupid, right? But I can say, hey, what's on your mind? What's really important? And then start to think about, how can I drive value? And again, that value is the root of the evaluation, right? Because then when you're adding real value, Jim and Wendy Kirkpatrick talk about this in their book, is return on expectation. That's one of the most important metrics in my mind of any learning and development effort is, did we meet the expectations, not just for our learners, right, but for our stakeholders? If we gave the same amount of attention and love and empathy that we give to our learners as we try to advocate for them, to our stakeholders as well, then that would make a huge difference. So that's the last thing I would call for, is in broader corporate L&D, is to think about that and approach work more holistically. Yes, you are serving your learners, but you're also serving an organization, and they have goals too.
Yeah, I think, when you think about the he who pays the piper calls the tune, we have this mixed view of who are the stakeholders. We've got customers. So who are the customers? Are they the learners, or are they the managers of the learners? Or are they the executives, or are they the customers of our customers? Because we're all on the payroll to do things, to make things that, go into other things and eventually leave our building door, so to speak, and become our external customers' inputs. And so, understanding the value chains of our organization, and whether we're working on, something that's at the core of our value chain as an enterprise, or whether we're working on a support functional thing, because if people don't get paid, they're going to leave. So we got to make sure they get paid, even though that's why we're in business here. That's just a means to the ends of being able to produce the products and services for our customers. Yeah, so I think that those are good things. I think that establishing that value, working on things of value, and being able to describe it in business terms, not in learning terms.
Yep.
The quality world struggled with this for a long time. How to sell quality, because quality control, quality assurance, well, that's a cost center. They don't generate revenues, and so we in L&D are trapped in that kind of look too. So whether you call it return on investment or cost benefit analysis, or it's what the quality world called cost of non-conformance, what's this problem costing us? What's this deviation from a future goal or a current state goal? What's that? And then what's the value to address that? So what's the cost and the benefit? And so the benefit is the return on the benefit. It's the problem to be solved. It's the opportunity to be achieved. And if we aren't attuned to how business talks about business, we won't understand what we're hearing regarding the value of the initiative that we might be working on. And so we need to begin to think about these things, and that they're not all dollarizable. If you said, hey, Factory 12 will catch on fire otherwise, we don't need to dollarize that to know that that's no good, and we need to spend some time and energy and invest in stopping that from happening, or effectively dealing with it should it happen. I think that I'm happy that so many people, I think, nowadays are beginning to talk the language of performance. And I think that, Greg, you've been doing that. That's what I noticed about you when we first did the podcast back in 2021. But I think that, it's encouraging to me as I get ready to really retire that people are focused on performance and see learning as a means to that end, and understanding that some performance is not of really high stakes, high value, and there are other things that are. But depending on what your own leadership wants you to do, we just got to crank out a bunch of stuff because people think we're not doing that. Well, okay, that's a different short-term mission than actually creating measurable results out there with your clients. So that's something that practitioners need to begin to think about their own organization, and where are we in terms of our journey? Are we already there? Are we on our way there? Are we just starting? And what's the situation we're facing? Do we have clients who are all for what we want to become, or are they fighting us? And so helping us understand that now, ideally our L&D leadership would be sharing that with us and communicating that with us, and we'd be all on the same page, so to speak, as we go off to address some of the challenges that we face. So thank you for sharing the names of the people. Yes, share with me the URLs, their LinkedIn profile URLs, and I'll share that in the show notes here. And I want to thank you for the podcast that you've produced and your sharing of what you're learning on your journey. And I thank you so much for being on this podcast with me today.
Thank you, Guy. It's a pleasure.
All right. You have a great day. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.